For my final project, I had the honor of speaking with Indian Education Specialist Mike Jette, who works at the Montana Office of Public Instruction. The subject of this interview was the Indian Education for All program, or IEFA, specifically its goals, its history, and its implementation.
We have these new social studies standards here in Montana that I think are very powerful. We weaved in Indian Education for All throughout, the K-12 standards, in all content areas. And so a good example is in third grade, we have a new social studies standard that says all students are going to learn the names of the tribes in their own languages. Those third graders, in theory, should be learning what the Crow call themselves or what the Blackfeet call themselves. And so then the part of my job is, okay, we've got some resources that already talk about tribal names, but how can we update those, make them a little more engaging, exciting, so students could use them, they're teacher friendly, and then build in some more, lesson plans around that to meet that standard. So then on the other side of that then is we have to offer professional development for those teachers who teach third grade so they can actually learn the names too. A lot there. And so like you got one standard that talks about symbols of nations. So you can just weave in all kinds of cultural, content. Another standard is asking students that they're going to learn about tribal sovereignty and know, the history and foundations of, what is tribal sovereignty and what's it mean? About what Indian Ed for All, Indian education may have looked like. It was probably just a little bit here and there. You might mention the Bering Strait theory in a class, Lewis and Clark and the Westward Movement, or maybe the Iroquois Confederacy and interactions with early colonial leaders, Thanksgiving, maybe code talkers. Probably a lot more superficial coverage, maybe a lot more generalities. Definitely a lot more inaccurate information. In theory, it should be. And so if we do this right, we have these standards for kindergarten and first grade, second grade, third grade. And if we have Indian education, specific standards in there, no matter where kids going to school at third grade, you should be learning about those tribal names. Or here's an art standard that talks about Native American art, for high school. And so I think if teachers are truly teaching to those standards, that Indian Ed for All, in theory, you should be hitting it everywhere at different grade levels and at different content areas. Because you could go into 10 different schools and see it implemented in 10 different ways. And then that's that local control thing too. But as long as we can get stuff in our standards and build it somehow into some of our assessments, I think that's that's pretty powerful. Any new teacher, before they get certified to teach in Montana, has to take an Indian Ed for All online class, before they get any certification from us. And so there's at least, you have to come in with a basic baseline, level of knowledge before you can get that, license for Montana. So there's that. But what I've seen is like, with, up and coming teachers is, I think the MUS, they're doing a pretty good job of making sure Indian Ed for All is on people's radar screens. I know a lot of folks during their student teaching have to have some sort of Indian Ed for All like component to their student teaching. I know Carroll College here in Helena does that. Everybody who's student teaching has to do some sort of Indian Ed for All lesson or unit as part of their student teaching experience. I have seen a lot of up and coming teachers really want more, right? Yeah. But I think that's part of it too, is how do we market Indian Ed for All to some of the older teachers, and saying, here's some ways to enhance your current instruction and to make it even better. And so they that's kind of how we, you always have to adapt your instruction to meet new standards too. I was just talking the other day, it's like we almost need a new PR campaign for Indian Ed for All, because we do have a lot of new resources, really cool stuff that we can share with teachers. And when I go and meet with those teachers and we share some of our stuff, you can just see them get excited about, well, I didn't know that was there, and or, well, that's a great resource. Well, I didn't know this standard existed. And so I think just almost this, even having a PR campaign to say, hey, here's some new standards, here's some really exciting materials to help you meet these standards, that kind of stuff. Using, Zoom as a teaching platform to reach even more folks. And now, say, Quinn, you're teaching a class, you could bring in a virtual Blackfeet guest speaker talking about Blackfeet traditional ecological knowledge and Blackfeet relationships with plants. So you don't have to be the expert, but you can bring one in as a virtual guest speaker. Here's a cool grant project that was out of Columbus. A teacher in Columbus actually was able to work with Crow elders to come over and teach us students about Crow history and culture. And so the students actually did research, went down to archives and looked in museums and then took photos, but then they also weaved in the Crow history of that place. So they were able to pay the Crow elders to come over and, compensate them for their time and, maybe pay guest speakers to come in or to, use that money to pay for a bus to take their students on a field trip. So, Livingston schools did an exchange with students on the Crow reservation at Pryor and went to visit their school. And then kids from Pryor came to Livingston. And so some of those monies could support student exchanges. They could support professional development for teachers. They could support students during research. And so there's a lot of, really innovative things happening out there with some of our grant funds. So.
During the interview, Mr. Jette stated that the greatest issue plaguing Indian education for all at the moment is reaching educators who are already teaching. I think a large part of that issue comes, like he said, from an unawareness of the new standards and activities that the Indian Education for All unit has been promoting. I think the solution to this is fairly simple, but it would require cooperation with the education department as a whole. And that's that the program needs to start prioritizing greater cooperation, not just between tribal representatives and instructors, but also between new instructors and old ones. If this was done, new instructors could act as representatives of Indian Education for All within their own schools, and it wouldn't require any additional funding. That said, if you could acquire additional funding, which could be done through a variety of means, it could always be helpful to employ more Indian education specialists who could in turn also support greater cooperation between school districts and tribes.